We start on the planet Krypton. Mars, where some dopey fella falls off a cliff and breaks his helmet, leading to his eyes bulging worse than when I forget to take my thyroid tablets in the morning.
Damn!
Fortunately, turns out it was all just a nightmare, and this Douglas Quaid fella keeps being haunted by such dreams about the Red Planet, and his wife Laurie seems to be uber jealous about the woman that's always hanging about with him in his fantasies.
Bruh.
Anyway, the next morning, the news tells us how the working class rebels over on Mars keep stopping the corporate mining efforts because they totally want independence and shit. Whilst Laurie tries to distract him from constantly banging on about wanting to visit Mars by telling him to shut up and go to work already. But he gets suckered in by a commercial on his morning commute about getting some phony fakey memory implants which make you feel like you've actually vacationed somewhere without having to actually go and do all that exhausting travelling and stuff. And although his mate at work tries to put him off it, he can't resist at least going down there to see what it's all about, and he instantly falls for the sales pitch, hook, line and sphincter. Apparently, this procedure will make it seem like he just spent 2 weeks on a luxury holiday on the Red Planet, and he even agrees to the add-on packages, choosing the secret agent option before he can say, "Where's the dotted line already, bro?" So the specialists prepare him for the implants, but first have him select his sexy preferences, and he gets to choose his ideal woman, what he'll then be able to remember shagging every night for 2 weeks as part of the trip, before quickly being sedated and ready to get utterly mind-fucked. But suddenly, the chief salesman bloke is called in, because this Quaidy fella has gone full schizo, yelling about how his name isn't actually Quaid and now they've blown his cover and shit. And they just can't believe he's acting out the secret agent portion of the package when they haven't even implanted it yet. And they soon realise he's already had his memory messed about with, way before even they started molesting his mind. So they clear out his noggin and send him home in a Johnny cab, what seems to be driven by a soulless puppet more plastic and hollow than Simon Cowell. But before he can get to his apartment, his mate from work totally tries to kill him because reasons. But Quaid turns the tables and starts snapping necks, because the secret agent part of him is totally kicking in. Or some shit. Once he finally gets upstairs, he tells his wife all about how his best mate just tried to cancel him IRL, but she doesn't believe it, and tries to gaslight him into thinking that the recall place just messed up his mind and made him super paranoid and shit. But he shows her the blood on his hands, so naturally, she tries to cancel him and all, before revealing how the past 8 years of their marriage was all a lie, and she didn't even know him till 6 weeks ago when she was assigned by the agency to suck him off every night and then make sure the actual memory implant settled in and stuff. She then tries to stall him so her bosses can get up there, but he soon cottons on and gets the heck out of Dodge, and the head goon called Richter chases him through CGI X-ray machines and up through various escalators using a tracking device. But luckily, he promptly escapes on the subway, whilst Richter gets bollocked by his boss for shooting at him, because this Cohagen villain totally wants Quaid brought back alive and not riddled with bullet holes and shit. A mysterious bloke then tells Doug that he's been totally bugged, so makes him wrap a wet towel around his head and pretend he's a Sikh for shits and giggles, before collecting a random suitcase and speeding off in a hijacked cab, which then promptly crashes into a giant fireball. Inside the mysterious suitcase is a wad of cash, a gun, and a strange device that makes him scared of his own shadow, which turns out to be a hologram tool that mirrors his movements, and according to my mate Chekhov, is something he's sure will totally come up again, and usually sometime in the third act. But even stranger, he plays a VHS tape which features a guy who looks exactly like him but much less muggy, because he ain't so stupid as to put towels on his head every time some random stranger tells him to for a laugh. And this TV bloke is called Hauser, who reckons he was working for the bad guys until he met a hot chocolate girl and totally switched teams. And because he knows too much about Cohagen and his dirty schemes, he had to wipe his own memory and go into hiding. Meanwhile, the baddies have picked up on the giant fireball explosion and are searching the area for him. So the VHS Hauser chappie tells him to stuff that automatic bug extractor up his nose and get his butt over to Mars pronto, so he can expose that naughty exec who has a monopoly over its resources. Which he totally does, just as Richter and his goons bust in and shoot up an innocent rat. Anyway, Quaid finally makes it to Mars, but has clearly been spending too much time on TikTok on the flight over because he now identifies as trans and shit. Hilariously, Richter walks straight past his arch nemesis, But unfortunately, her cunning disguise randomly starts to go haywire, and she spazzes out worse than an epileptic nurse meeting an ambulance with flashing lights, before taking his mask off and blowing a hole in the side of the dome, allowing him time to escape again on a train. Later, Cohagen again bollocks that Richter bloke, but this time in person, and tells him that some psychic rebel leader called Quato totally wants what's in Quaid's head, so they've totally got to get to him first, and she. Arriving in the underground district of Venusville, what's mainly populated by a bunch of mutants, he heads to the hotel that Hauser told him to visit and retrieves a note from his safe, which tells him to now go find some hooker bird called Melina, before meeting a rather persistent cab driver who won't shut up about how many kids he has to feed. So Quaid lets him show him around town and get him out of the rebel firefight that's just kicked off, and that apparently happens every day around this sort of time. What? After arriving at the mutant strip club and staring at a triple-titted floozy, he meets up with that Melina bird, what looks just like his ideal fantasy girl that he designed just before he fell asleep and got his mind molested at the start of the film, who proceeds to give him a good slap for his trouble, and she just can't believe that he disappeared without telling her he was alive after he was previously captured and tortured by his ex-boss. But he tells her he don't remember any of that kinky shit, and she also can't believe that her badass ex-lover Hauser is now a bog-standard construction worker who can't even remember his own name. Later that evening, he gets a visit from Dr. Edgemar from those public transport recall commercials, who explains that he's been inserted into his mind to help him wake up, because Quaid is really still at the recall lab back on Earth and trapped in the very fantasy that he paid for them to put in his noggin. And to prove it, he brings in his wife Laurie, who soon confirms he's gone full schizo. But Quaid notices the supposedly imaginary Dr. Edgemar is sweating worse than Rudy Giuliani at a press conference. Bruh. And thus realises he must be a real-life phony fakey liar fella and totally yeets him without hesitation. Quaid is then captured by Richter's men, but Melina rescues him just in the nick of time, before Quaid politely asks for a divorce by blowing Laurie's noggin off. The pair then escape by doing some indoor parkour, and the goons are reluctant to shoot at them in case they shatter the dome. And before you can say, why isn't said dome bulletproof when they clearly have a massive problem with violent gun-toting rebels kicking off every 5 minutes? That rather persistent taxi driver picks them up and hot-tails it over to Venusville, where one of the mutants hides them in a secret compartment whilst Richter and his goons start stacking bodies, including that three-titted tart what keeps giving me a raging lob. And they even have a saucy sexing dwarf cut fuckers down with a machine gun. And before I can say, now that's exactly what I'd design if I was in a recall dream machine, Cohagen shuts down the air conditioning in the mutant slums and also the oxygen fans. Meanwhile, down in the tunnels, the protagonists run into them rebel fellas, and also discover that the persistent cab driver who has 5 kids to feed is also a mutant, which totally proves that he's on their side, isn't she? A little later, and the rebels are told that they have to give Quaid over to the bad guys if they want to keep breathing and doing that living thing. But he's soon taken into a super secret room to meet the super secret psychic rebel leader Quato, which turns out to be a mutant baby man growing out of the abdomen of a fully grown man. And this freak looks into Quaid's mangled mind to figure out what Cohagen's big secret is, and turns out that the corporate creep is hiding a 500,000-year-old alien reactor inside an ancient mountain that, once activated, produces breathable air for everyone that would essentially end his market monopoly over Mars's resources and totally stop him from doing all these bad things. Unfortunately, Cohagen's forces finally find him, and in a shocking twist what no one could ever see coming, that rather persistent cab driver, who's always desperate to hang around with him, totally shoots the mutant psychic leader freak, revealing himself to have been an undercover mole all along because reasons. And this lying fucker doesn't even have 1 kid to feed, let alone 5. Anyway, a dying Quato begs Quaid to start the reactor, before Richter does a hate crime by shooting a mutant cripple who was a key member of a minority group. And before you can say, mutant lives matter, Quaid and Melina are brought to Cohagen, who explains his genius scheme. And in yet another totally convoluted plot twist, he reveals how that Hauser fella was his close friend, who volunteered to become Douglas Quaid as a super elaborate ruse to get around a mutant's psychic abilities, and thereby infiltrate and destroy the pesky rebellion from within. Turns out Quaid's recall visit had activated him earlier than planned, And ironically, Cohagen has been helping him to survive that dopey Richter's pursuits because he hilariously had no idea any of this was going on, and now probably feels like a right mug. Cohagen then proves it all by showing yet another video of Hauser boasted about setting up the whole loony scheme with his boss, and said boss bloke soon orders Quaid to be restored to factory settings, and turned back into his best buddy Hauser pronto. And he also commands for Melina to be reprogrammed as his brainwashed floozy is a special reward. But Quady Boy gets so angry about all this nonsense that he totally hulks out, and they eventually manage to escape to the mines below the reactor. But they totally need to get a move on, because those smelly mutants are still suffocating without them oxygen fans, and none of them seem to have developed any useful abilities like having a second pair of lungs and shit. Suddenly though, that rather persistent cab driver's back and trying to kill him rather persistently, and this time with a giant fuck-off drill. And it looks like it's curtains for the #1 paranoid schizophrenic phony fakey secret agent. But luckily, Quaid cuts into the oil pipe and totally shuts it down, just before Melina was about to get a good drill in, but not in a good way. And he finishes off that persistent mutant cabin with a persistent little drill of his own. Arriving at the ancient reactor, Richter and his goons ambush our heroes via a super surprising sneak attack. But Quaid just giggles like a naughty schoolgirl when he reveals that he's used that Chekhov's hologram device and stitched them up like a kipper. So after gunning his dopey goons down, Quaid faces off with Richter on an elevator platform and swiftly disarms him rather literally. But before he can activate the alien machine, the dastardly Cohagen sticks a gat in his face and tells him all about what he's going to do to the people on the planet after he's done killing him. And also how it's totally lame that he won't turn back into his best buddy Hauser so they can go back to playing golf and oppressing the working classes and shit. And just before he gets deaded, Melina arrives and fills the baddie full of lead. And before you can say, that's what you get for monologuing, he sets off an explosive which breaches the hull. And they soon start getting sucked to death worse than a private session with my Autoblow 5000. But anyway, the explosive decompression blows that Cohagen-y chap out to the Martian surface, who starts to make some sort of disturbing cum face before totally suffocating to death. Meanwhile, Quady Boy finally activates the alien reactor before he and Melina are also blown out, and now his nightmare from the film's opening has totally come true, and he's back to rolling around in the Martian desert having forgotten to take his thyroid pills again. Or some shit. The reactor then melts the planet's ice core into a gas that bursts to the surface, terraforming the planet with a breathable atmosphere within a matter of minutes. Because science, bro. And thereby saving Quaid and Melina from their bulgy oblivion, and also the rest of the Mars population. Huzzah! And we end with Quaid momentarily wondering if everything was a dream after all, mainly because the classic red planet now has a friggin' blue sky, which was also part of the narrative story's ending back at that recall place. But Melina just says, shut up about your dreams, Gimp Boy, and stop my face off already. And that's it. That's the movie. Though my favourite part was the triple-titted thought, for obvious reasons. Man, if radiation caused mutations like that in the real world, I'd have packed up and moved to Chernobyl years ago, son. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Considering that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.